In a country that claims all people are created equal, it's strange how not everyone is deemed worthy of having their name said right. It was ESL class, English as a Second Language. The Me and My Culture presentations kicked off on a Monday morning under flickering fluorescent lights and the wheezing hum of an old AC unit. Reed, with a half smirk curling on his lips, introduced his partner. Let me introduce my partner, the owner of the most unpronounceable name on earth, Apple. Diva? The class erupted in laughter. Pens tapped against desks in rhythm like a signal. A few phones flashed. Then came the laughs, loud, effortless, as if Aparna's name was a shared inside joke. Her real name, Aparna Devika, had just been twisted into a punchline, a free comedy show in a classroom that supposedly celebrated diversity. She, standing right next to Reed, didn't laugh, didn't flinch, didn't react. She simply stood still, like a wrong note written into an unfinished symphony. In her hands, a thick sheet of paper, top right corner creased. Title, Aparna Devika, My Culture, Rabindranath Tagore. Now slashed through her name with a red marker. At the back of the room, Ms. Turner, curly hair, rainbow-shaped name tag, famously friendly and inclusive, gave a gentle, performative smile. No worries, she said, holding a dry erase marker. We'll just call you Maya. Easier to read, easier to remember, easier to connect. A girl with dark hair giggled. Apple Diva. Kinda catchy, honestly. Another chimed in. Maya definitely sounds more American. No one asked if Aparna was okay with any of it. When the bell rang, the room broke into motion. Books snapped shut. Chairs screeched. Conversations picked up again like a song on loop. But Aparna stayed still. Her name still hung on the board, like it had been framed but never truly belonged to her. On her desk sat a heavy textbook, American Ways, an introduction to American culture. The opening page quoted, Freedom, Equality, the American Dream. She stared at the line for a long while, then quietly shut the book. A single thought formed, sharp enough to nick her self-worth. If erasing your name is this easy for everyone, maybe I was never really here at all. By the end of Thursday's ESL class, sunlight had retreated from the tall windows. The room dimmed under the blinking pulse of dying fluorescent bulbs. Ms. Turner handed back last week's grammar quizzes, methodically, mechanically, almost like clockwork. As if each paper was just a cog in the great machine labeled Celebrating Linguistic Diversity, but powered solely by the need to standardize every difference. Her voice, as usual, came light and pre-programmed. Great effort, Ali. Nice phrasing, Yejin. Check your comparatives next time, Jose. Then she paused at Aparna's desk. She didn't speak right away, just stared at the test in her hand, then glanced at Aparna. Her eyes hesitated, uncertain, not unkind, but no longer warm either. You need to write your name more clearly, Aparna, she said, her tone hovering between suggestion and correction. She placed the paper on the desk with that particular brand of American politeness, half smile, half apology. Teachers here can't read handwriting like that. Next time, write it so Americans can read it, okay? The words landed soft as a breeze, but stung like a small blade wrapped in velvet. No blood, just a slow, cold cut. Her name, Aparna Devika, was written exactly as it should be. No spelling mistakes, no foreign characters, just soft, slightly slanted handwriting with a gentle underline beneath her middle name. It was the way her mother had taught her to write, on the worn wooden table in their small home in Hyderabad. With blue fountain pens, each stroke drawn as carefully as a vein, carrying the bloodline of family, of language, of tradition. Not just a line of letters for a bureaucratic system to sort, but here, through Ms. Turner's eyes, filtered by invisible standards no one ever taught her how to navigate, that name was suddenly wrong. Not because it was incorrect, but because it was different. And in a society that called itself free, different was enough to be politely dismissed. No one ever explained what American handwriting meant. No one told girls like her why they had to rewrite their own names just to make them palatable to the people grading them. So Aparna quietly uncapped her pen, not to decorate, but to defend. She began to trace a line around her name, then another, and another. Each ring of ink wasn't for beauty. It was a barrier. Slim, invisible. She was building between her sense of self and the careless erasures of a system designed to standardize what should have been honored. Each outline whispered what her voice couldn't say aloud. My name may be different, but it is not wrong, and I'm not sorry for it. From behind, Reed leaned over and snickered just loud enough for 3 or 4 others to hear. Yo, looks like she's drawing a magic circle. What is this? Witchcraft 101? A girl nearby chimed in, sarcasm unapologetically sharp. Maybe she's summoning her real self, the one that can actually say the letter R right. Laughter trickled through the back of the classroom. Short, quiet, but loud enough to drag her name, once again, into a comedy no one asked her to star in. A punchline made of pronunciation. An identity turned into a joke. Aparna had finished her presentation 2 weeks early, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because she was afraid that if it wasn't perfect, clean, clear, and precise, she might be overlooked. She had chosen Tagore, the first Indian poet ever awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. He had written hundreds of poems in Bengali, English, Persian, and had once been mocked for writing in too many languages at once. Multilingual, multifaceted, but never trimmed down to fit, Tagore had said in a lecture. Aparna had copied that line by hand into the last slide of her project. At the top of her paper, she wrote clearly, Aparna Devika, ESL 3A, me and my culture presentation 3 lines. Properly underlined, not a single letter out of place. But on the day the Outstanding ESL Student Work Board went up, her project wasn't there. Reed's was, with a bright red background and the title, Mexican Food and Why I Love Tacos. Yejin's was there too, a compact piece likely assisted by Google Translate about celebrating Mid-Autumn Festival in Seoul. So was Jose's. Football and family centered in bold block letters, JOEM. Her name, though, nowhere to be found. Aparna stood in front of the board for a long moment. Everyone else had left the room. A breeze from the hallway flipped a corner of someone else's paper, but hers had no corner to lift. She walked back to her desk, sat down, and opened her folder. There was her submission and Ms. Turner's handwritten comment, insightful content, strong comparison. Consider format guidelines next time. Beneath that, her name, spelled right, as always. When the bell rang, Aparna stepped up to the teacher's desk. Her voice was steady, no hesitation. Ms. Turner, she asked, I just wanted to know, was there something wrong with my project? Is that why it wasn't posted on the board? Ms. Turner was gathering her lesson plans. She looked up, surprised, like it had never crossed her mind that a student might notice their project hadn't made the board. Oh no, your project was great. Really great, she said, flashing a slightly nervous smile. It's just that. I had to pick ones that were more accessible for the younger ESL levels, you know? Simpler, easier to picture, easier to pronounce. Easier to pronounce? Aparna repeated, her eyes still on her paper. Ms. Turner paused, caught off guard. Well, I just thought, names like Tagore or Aparna, they might be a little tricky for the younger kids, or for people who aren't used to them. I didn't mean anything bad by it. You understand what I mean, right? Aparna didn't answer right away. Then she smiled, quietly. That kind of smile you give when someone finally says out loud the thing you've always suspected, but never expected them to admit. If a name isn't easy to pin on a board, she said softly, maybe it isn't easy to find on a map either. And if my name tangles your tongue, perhaps that's why it vanishes so easily from your memory. Ms. Turner looked up again, but by then, Aparna had already turned away. Later, when Ms. Turner asked the class to prepare for the next round of presentations by sharing something funny about your culture, Reed's hand shot up before she even finished speaking. So, I just realized we've got a full buffet in here. We've got Banana Prince, Apple Diva, maybe Mango Messiah's up next. A few soft chuckles. A couple of heads nodded like it all made perfect sense. A girl by the window, tight curls, deadpan tone, added without a trace of irony. Alphabet soup. We're not a class. We're a grocery aisle. The line didn't hit like a slap, more like the ripple of a small stone skimming across a quiet lake. No one bled, but the impact carried. No one pushed back. No one turned to check on Aparna. Maybe because in their minds, the longer your name, the thicker your skin, as if syllables could armor your soul. Reed leaned over to Yejin, smirking. How do you even remember her name? I keep thinking it's a Wi-Fi password. Yejin said nothing, just lowered her head a little more than usual, and Aparna, seated in the farthest corner, beneath a faded poster that once read, "Diversity is our strength," remained silent. But this silence wasn't soft or shy. It was solid, cold. It wasn't the kind of silence you wear when someone mispronounces your name, or the embarrassed hush that comes when you speak English with the wrong mouth shape. This was the silence of someone who had stopped asking to be understood. No one noticed exactly when she left the classroom, only that her small frame in the faded blue uniform had slipped through the wooden door, its handle always slightly loose, and no one said a word about it. She walked straight to the third-floor girls' bathroom, the one no one really used, where the window opened out onto a moss-covered roof, not to hide, just to breathe. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled the presentation out of her folder. The paper was crisp, unwrinkled, the ink sharp and clean. It still carried the faint scent of new paper, blended with the toner smell from the office printer at her mother's favorite copy shop near Little India. The title was still there, Rabindranath Tagore, the poet of many tongues. On the final slide, the quote remained, the one she once thought of as a small shield. I will not let the waves of other tongues drown my own. She stared at the words as if they were an old friend, one she had just pushed off the edge of the river. And then she tore it. No regret. Only because that paper had been written with the belief that if she worked hard enough, people would stop mispronouncing her name. The pieces fell to the cold tile floor. Not loud, but each fragment felt like a piece of her being peeled away from the outline of her identity. She slid down to the floor, back resting against a wall mottled with soap stains. Outside, the bell rang, long, dry, and emotionless. But to her, it sounded like confirmation that the presentation had never existed at all. She used to believe that being a good student would help her name survive, at least on a sheet of paper pinned to the corner of a classroom wall. But here to exist, you didn't need to be correct. You needed to be easy. Easy to say, easy to digest, easy to skim past. And no matter how many right words she wrote, it still wouldn't make anyone pause long enough to read a name that didn't belong in their dictionary. I used to believe that being good at school would make me visible. But maybe here, it's not light that makes you exist. It's clean pronunciation and the right number of vowels. In the mirror, she didn't see failure. Just a name that was starting to fade. It was the start of a new month. The sky over Texas was overcast but not cold. The schoolyard was speckled with dry leaves, brown and yellow like a quiet carpet of unfinished autumn. Woodridge High welcomed a special guest that morning. No banners, no microphones, no live stream. Second period in ESL began with Reed's laughter. Same smirk, same brand of humor laced with self-importance. Alphabet soup again, he muttered to the kid in front. Maybe we'll get miso queen today. Aparna looked up briefly. No reaction, no ripple. But she heard it. She had prepared a new presentation. No one had asked her to. On the final slide, she'd typed, a name is the thing people say before they hear you speak. Today, the ESL class had a visitor. Jasmine Crockett had been invited as part of a school-wide initiative, Language Equity in Learning Environments. She didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She didn't bring a media crew or even an assistant. She simply sat in the back of the room, in a cracked plastic chair, hands folded in her lap, watching, listening. When Aparna walked up to turn in her assignment, Jasmine followed her with quiet focus. The paper in Aparna's hands was neatly folded, her name bolded at the top. Aparna Devika, but a faint blue line had been drawn diagonally across it. Jasmine asked, her voice low and calm, why did you cross it out? The class fell silent. Even Reed froze. Aparna hesitated. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't avoid the question. So the person grading it doesn't hesitate when they read it, she said. I thought Maybe it would make things less awkward for them. Jasmine didn't respond right away. She remained seated, set her pen down on the cover of her notebook, and looked at Aparna in that particular way. The kind only people who've had their names butchered during a legal hearing can understand. I used to do that too, Jasmine said, not raising her voice, not dramatizing the moment. I used to shorten my name on job applications. I used to trim away traces of blackness on my resume. I once let someone mispronounce my name during a live hearing and pretended it was just a small mistake. Her words didn't echo. They settled, like a drop of black ink falling onto a white map, spreading slowly. No one touched it, but everyone saw. Reed stopped tapping his pen, though his fingers twitched as if they wanted to say something they hadn't yet found the courage to say. Yejin looked up, not out of curiosity, but like someone who just felt a string tug tight around their chest. And Aparna, she didn't lower her eyes, didn't glance around. She just blinked slowly, like she was stitching her name back together with invisible thread. Jasmine continued, "But here's what I learned. Every time we cross out a name just to make it easier to say, we're also crossing out a part of someone, their history, their language, their identity, and the respect they're owed." Jasmine looked at Aparna and then at Yejin, sitting quietly behind her. Then she spoke, her tone firm but warm. "Someone might mispronounce your name 3 times, but you only need to say it right once, to keep your identity intact." When the bell rang, Jasmine didn't leave right away. She paused beside the classroom roster taped to the wall. Most of the names were short, J, Anna, Joe M. But beneath one, in faint pencil, was a smaller line, Yejin. Jasmine didn't trace it, didn't erase it. She simply placed her hand over it and stood still. "I remember every name," she said softly, "even when all that's left is a line faint as breath. And if you write it again, even in pencil, you're choosing to exist a second time." It was Wednesday afternoon. The school was spilling into break. The back courtyard echoed with the rubber soles of 14-year-olds surging like playful waves. The main faculty room shut with a brisk click, but the special ESL class in Wing E remained in session, holding its weekly homeroom. Ms. Turner stood at the front, voice gentle as always. "Your final assignment this term is a letter. But not to me. To yourself, in 10 years. She wrote it on the board. "To my future self." The room buzzed with whispers, soft laughter, light groans. Reed cracked a grin and muttered, "Future me is going to have a Tesla and 3 robot kids." Aparna didn't respond. She sat still, shoulders dipped, as if her shadow wanted to shrink beneath the dim yellow classroom lights. Her hand rested on the paper. Then she began to write. "Dear Aparna, 10 years from now, I don't know where on earth you'll be when you read this, but I hope that somewhere, someone says your name right, on the very first try, so that you won't have to smile anymore just to pretend it doesn't hurt when they get it wrong." When she finished, she sat blankly for a moment, then folded the page, pressed down the corner with her thumb. She was going to rip it. Jasmine had returned to Woodridge that afternoon for a scheduled meeting with the principal about a public dialogue initiative. As she walked past Wing E, she noticed a few classrooms still lit. The ESL room was unusually quiet. Miss Turner had stepped out to fetch materials. Jasmine walked in, her steps soft. There she saw Aparna sitting alone. A folded sheet of paper lay by her hand. "Were you about to tear that up?" Aparna startled, then gave a small nod, but didn't move. Jasmine sat across from her. The warm classroom light skimmed across her cheek, tracing the soft creases that looked more like lines from a long, handwritten letter. "I once wrote a letter like that," she said. "When I was applying for jobs, I used to go by Jess. My real name was longer, stronger, blacker. I thought using the short version would get me called in faster." "And did it?" "Yes, I got the job, but in the thank you letter, they got my name wrong. They addressed it to my old apartment and misspelled my last name. They read half of me and skipped the rest. That night I bought myself new earrings. I thought I deserved to be called by my real name. But when I got home, I just placed the box on a high shelf and left it there." Aparna sat still. The letter sat between them, folded neatly. She placed her hand on it. What if 10 years from now, people still don't say my name right? Jasmine smiled gently but without hesitation. Then you'll say theirs right. You'll pronounce their names the way they deserve. And one day someone will realize they've never had that before. Aparna nodded. Then she unfolded the letter, signed it again. This time, the blue ink made no strike through her name. Monday morning. At Woodridge High, the central bulletin board, usually reserved for bathroom announcements, musical auditions, or basketball tryouts, drew an unusual crowd. A single sheet of A4 paper was taped dead center. Written by hand, in blue ink, no name, no title, no caption. Just 3 lines. When I mispronounced Beethoven, the teacher corrected me. When someone called me banana, no one corrected them. So who's really learning wrong? The handwriting wasn't fancy, but it was clear, slightly tilted, like someone trying to make each word firmer than the emotions behind it. At first, just 2 or 3 students stopped to read. 10 minutes later, the entire ESL group was standing there, along with many others. Reed was the first to speak. Who even wrote this? Man, drama much? Yejin stood silently, science folder in hand, but suddenly uninterested. Her eyes lingered on the 3 lines. Then her fingers closed slowly around the folder. Aparna wasn't there. She walked beneath the overhang of the school building, slowly without stopping. She could hear the whispers from both sides, but she didn't turn, didn't speak. Still, she felt it, clearly. They weren't just 3 sentences. They were 3 strikes. Each one landed where 7 months of silence had piled up and split it wide open. The principal received an urgent email within hours. The admin assistant came to take the paper down. A new note was posted in its place. This bulletin board is reserved for official announcements only. But before the letter was removed, one student had already taken a picture. It hit Twitter first, captioned with a line sharp as a blade. Everyone learns English. No one learns how to say our names. Jasmine Crockett saw the post while waiting outside the principal's office. She stopped scrolling, pinched her fingers to zoom in on the photo, stared at each line of blue ink, at every period, every word. Nothing extra, nothing missing. That Friday in the main hall of Woodridge High, cool-toned LED lights poured down on a makeshift stage, usually reserved for semester award ceremonies or student talent shows. Today was the school's annual event, Diversity Celebration. A rainbow-colored logo stretched across the white backdrop, beneath bold letters that read, "Honor Difference. Grow Together." But under that vibrant slogan, the student speaker list was a predictable roll call. 3 white American names, 1 Latino boy who had changed his name from Esteban to Ethan, and Reed. Reed had been chosen for his positive influence in the ESL class, according to Ms. Turner. Aparna's name wasn't there, neither was Yejin's, nor Jose's, whose essay was rejected for using too much Spanish. The room buzzed with anticipation as Reed stepped up to the mic. He wore a dark blue shirt, hair stiff with gel, his smile caught halfway between smug and unsure. He opened with a joke. Anyone here like tacos? As for me, I like diversity the way I like Buffett's. Plenty of options, easy to swallow and not too spicy. Scattered chuckles, a few polite claps from the teacher section. But something hung in the air. Off-key, as if the audience had been waiting for a different song, and the music came in flat. Aparna sat in the 4th row, flanked by Yejin and Jose. She didn't look at Reed. Her hand gripped a folded piece of paper, the letter to her future self she once considered tearing. The ink had blurred slightly along the creases. Her thumb traced the lines like retracing an old bruise, carefully, deliberately. When Reed gave a shallow bow and stepped back, the event coordinator walked up to introduce the next part of the program. That's when Aparna stood. No warning, no invitation, but no one stopped her. She walked slowly toward the stage. No tremble, no ducking from the light, nothing in her hands but a crumpled page, and eyes that no longer begged to be accepted. At center stage, she didn't greet the crowd, didn't ask for permission. She just spoke. My name is Aparna Devika. Not Maya, not Apple Diva, not any version of me that's easier to say, easier to swallow, easier to forget. I used to think I was a formatting error because my name wasn't written the American way, because I spoke English in the voice of my mother, because I wrote my name with an underline beneath it, like it needed defending. But today I say this again, to myself and to anyone willing to listen. I am not a neatly labeled item in your cultural convenience aisle. I am a language of my own. I don't need to be shortened, softened, or reshaped to suit the taste of the majority. A hush fell across the entire auditorium. Not the forced silence of discipline, but the quiet that arrives when something honest enters a room and everyone feels its weight. Somebody stopped typing mid-sentence. Another let go of a paper coffee cup without sipping. No laughter, no whisper, no interruption. Just that collective stillness. The kind that doesn't demand attention, but earns it. Down near the front row, Jasmine Crockett slowly stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She just spoke, softly, clearly, with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing exactly what it means to be erased. A P-A-R-N-A-D-E-V-I-K-A. She said it again, slower this time, like setting something back in place. Aparna Devika, a name that doesn't need rewriting, a name that doesn't need to be read any other way. Then she turned to the student beside her. Yejin stood, nodded, and repeated without hesitation. Aparna Devika. One row followed, then another. More names began to be spoken. Not to count them, not to display them, but to reclaim them. And finally, the entire room echoed, quietly but with unwavering conviction. Aparna Devika. For the first time in her life, she heard her name pronounced without pause, without correction, without being reduced to a joke. And for the first time, she didn't have to write her name inside a decorative frame to feel like it belonged somewhere. Because now, it had been lifted and held, right there, in the middle of a room that was no longer the same. Not everyone understood the full weight of what had just happened. But in that moment, respect was no longer just a rainbow-colored slogan on a backdrop. It had become a gesture, a pause, a deliberate pronunciation, a name repeated not to test memory, but to affirm dignity. In a country that declares all people are created equal, sometimes equality doesn't begin with a law. Sometimes it begins with a name, spoken right. And when the entire room repeated, Aparna Devika, it wasn't just a name being said out loud. It was a collective voice saying, we see you, we recognize you, and you deserve to exist, fully, unapologetically, as yourself. The next day in class, Ms. Turner arrived early, carrying a stack of newly printed name cards. They weren't the generic plastic tags ordered from the school supplier. These were thick sheets of cardstock, each name printed in bold, clear letters, with phonetic spelling underneath, and a short line in the student's native language explaining what the name meant or where it came from. She took her time, carefully taping each one to a desk with transparent adhesive, adjusting the corners precisely. As if, for the first time, a name wasn't just something to shout across a roll call, but something to honor, as if it were a living part of someone's being. Students walked into class more slowly than usual. Some froze when they saw their name written in full. Some blushed. Some leaned over to ask their neighbor, wide-eyed. Reed slid into his seat. His card had only one line, Reed Collins. No phonetics, no roots, no language of origin. He looked around. His hand paused on the desk. For the first time, Reed realized. His name felt empty. Aparna glanced down at her name tag. Below her name, a line in Sanskrit, no longer something to tuck away. She reached into her pencil case, pulled out a felt-tip marker, and drew a gentle arc above her name. Not for decoration, but as a quiet declaration. My name was once crossed out, but today I choose to trace it back in. And from that morning on, equity stopped being a vocabulary word in a lesson. It became real, etched across every desk, spoken in every name, and glimmering in every pause where someone tried a little harder to say a name, not fast but right.